Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to the second in our live stream series with the fantastic Sid Madge from Meee Global. So last month, Sid was talking to us about finding the magic and gave us some really thought-provoking, really interesting discussions that certainly we had at VMG about some of the things that he was talking about. So we're really excited to move on to the next step, which is going to be living our magic. So, Sid, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. That's wonderful. Great introduction. And can you see the slides?
There we go.
There we go. So today is really about living our magic. So how do we do that? Really, really important. Hannah, has the slide changed to housekeeping?
Has a slide changed the housekeeping?
Yes. In other words, yes, it has. It's all right. Ignore me.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. Slides are moving on. Yeah.
Anyway, so a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this so others can benefit. Obviously, mentioned that last week or last month. Please do enjoy it. Take notes. There is nothing better than writing something down because it really does help the stuff stick. And as Ebbinghaus told us in the whole forgetful curve, literally within 90 days or 60 days, 90% of all information that we get given completely falls out of the grey matter or whatever we've got. So taking notes is really good, and share the good stuff. I mean, pass this around, please do. So let's do some checking in. So 0 to 10, 0 being rubbish, feel absolutely rubbish, 10 being absolutely fantastic, I'm flying. So if we can use the chat box and put our scores in, that would be super duper. And I'm going to look at those. So if you could just put those on, that would be great. And it's a really important thing. I mentioned this last month. This is something I do on a daily basis, and I do this also with my children too. And it's just how you're feeling. Yes, it is a moment thing, and moments do change, as we know, every day and every week and every month. But it's a really good little register of how I am checking in, to myself. This, again, is another important element. I touched on this again last month, but again, it's the same thing. If you're going to use one word to use to describe yourself, what would that one word be? Put that in the chat box. Because, again, it's really, really interesting because we got some really good answers last month. Some people are saying tired, demotivated, or whatever. But again, it's a very good indicator of where you're at. And as you know, the whole thing, the Meee program started was because I was in a classroom full of kids, and I asked this one question I've been asking it for decades. And the first lad that answered said weirdo. I thought he was being beautifully ironic, unique, and creative. He said that he was bullied, he didn't fit in at school. And then that then took me on this journey of, so why do we feel and think the way that we do? How can we change that inner perspective of the world? Because ultimately the world that I see and the world that I think I see and respond to is only the way that I see it. Now, if I want that to be different, then I can obviously change that kind of internal script. And that's the whole kind of Meee philosophy. Yes, we work with some amazing organizations, and that's why we do it, because when I look at the world around, we read the news or we listen to the news, it's pretty kind of negative. But actually, when you scratch the surface, you realize in all the communities that we've got, that you belong to, I belong to, and everyone else belongs to, some really, really good stuff happening out there. There really, really is. So for me, it's identifying that magic, finding that magic, which is in all of us. And then how do we live that every day? Because again, it's like Martin Seligman talked about in positive psychology. It's the environment that we sit within, whether that's physical, spiritual, emotional, or whatever, is really, really important. When you're thinking of animals and, you think as veterinary practices, animals that grow up, dogs and cats, rats, snakes, or whatever, if they grow up in negative and pessimistic environments, they reflect that environment. They really, really do. So that's why this is super important. Have we referenced loads of stuff? Yeah, of course we done. I mean, I'm continually reading books, and I've just actually, I think I've got about a third of the way through Tim Ferriss's latest book, which is The Tools of Titans. Oh, my life. I can't read more than 2 or 3 pages without them writing tons and tons of notes.
I like books like that.
Oh, it's mad. I mean, I put it down there on the bottom row, sort of fourth in from the left or fourth in from the right, sorry. But there are just so many good books out there. There really are. You know, does one book change your life? Not necessarily. It might be a combination of many, many of those. As you know, I've written 3 books about you personally, about you know, you in the world of work, and about you in the kind of world of family and community. If you would like a copy of these books, there is an offer code we can give to you for you to purchase those. And I'm going to say this in every single session, so you're going to hear this for at least another sort of 4 or 5 months, is none of what you'll hear from me or from Hannah or any other individual that you converse with or you kind of communicate with in the world is more powerful than what you tell yourself. It just isn't, because I can tell you you're fantastic, I can tell you you're brilliant, I can tell you the whole bunch of stuff that you could do. Ultimately, it's what you tell yourself that is the most important thing. It's that internal script. It's that what we call our operating system. If you can get to the root of that operating system, like any computer or any kind of bit of machinery or something that functions with an additional kind of thought process, you can change that thought process and you can change those outcomes. And that's why, again, you may be in a practice, you may be the owner of a practice, but nothing that your organization tells you or that you tell other people within your organizations is more important than what they tell themselves. It just isn't. It doesn't work. It really doesn't work that way. Because ultimately, and Hannah, we know, don't we, that we ultimately ask that question, what does it mean to me? Energy prices that go up, what does that mean to me and my household, my family, my business, and everything else? And that's why this is super, super important to remember, that is that whatever you read, whatever you watch, whatever you see, hear, listen to, or whatever, there is nothing more powerful than what you tell yourself. And I've mentioned this again. No one is born unhappy. You know, when you look at children who were even, you know, born into whatever kind of social climate it is, no child is born unhappy. You know, if you think about the great work that, you know, Brené Brown does in Fearing Great or Daring Greatly, and all the great books and talks that she does, she talks about that actually babies, you know, when children are born, they're hardwired for struggle. We have a natural propensity and natural ability to survive. We really do. And I always say this to people in the sessions that we run, is like, who taught you to walk? Who taught you to talk? Who teaches you English? Who teaches you science? Who teaches you biology, or whatever that is? Ultimately, it's you. Yes, you've got a frame of reference, whether that's a teacher or a book or a guide or whatever that is. But ultimately, it's us who teaches ourselves. And that's why when we're born, no one is born unhappy. And the thing is that when you look at mammals, when you look at creatures, when you think you go back however many hundreds of thousands of years and man didn't exist, do you think about all of these things that evolve? We are so adaptable. We are the most adaptable creatures that ever kind of, you know, walked or graced the earth. We are naturally creative. We're naturally social. And sometimes we just need that little bit of a shift in perspective to fall back in love with our own magic. And, you know, I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and a 24-year-old. And the thing is that when I listen to my youngsters, they still have that wonderful magic of curiosity, of asking all of those amazing questions, always looking and being curious. It is absolutely wonderful. So again, sometimes all we need to do is to kind of fall back in love with the magic that is the world at large. Last month, we talked about finding our magic, didn't we? So this time, I'd like to talk about how can we live that more every day? What are the simple things that we can do that then help us in that conversation with ourselves and with others to say, well, okay, let's just take a step back. How do we do that? Now, I love a good acronym. I really do. I think my initials actually are an acronym of something. I haven't quite made that yet. But if you've got pen, you know, digital notepad or whatever it is, write live down, LIVE. Okay. And I'm going to go through each one of these individually. Now, yes, L is for love. And yes, it is all around, as the great film, you know, sang to us. Actually, absolutely brilliant film. Love. And I love the title sequence and the ending sequence as well, when people are meeting in the airports and hugging, all that kind of stuff. It's absolutely fantastic. And the thing is that, you know, with love, if you love what you do, it makes a huge amount of difference. It really does. Call it passion, call it whatever you want to call it. But when you think of getting into the world of being a vet, whether you're whatever level of vet you are, or you're an assistant or whatever that is, the reason why you got into that practice is because you fell in love with some aspect of it. Sometimes we fall out of love, absolutely. but how do I keep falling back in love with the program, that I love, or the practice that I've got? Yes, I mentioned Shonda Rhimes last month, and I'm going to mention her again because this TED Talk is just brilliant. And I've watched it many, many times, and I'll watch it many, many times because it's always about the power of yes. And the reason why she mentioned and she did this TED Talk was because she's 3 young daughters, and she basically got to a point in her career. And this woman is amazing. I mean, she's written, Grey's Anatomy. I mean, she's written some of the greatest television kind of shows and series, available. But she literally had a really kind of bit of a hiccup in her career. And she thought, well, okay, so how do I now fall back in love with the things that I like to do? And when she talked about her work, she loves working, absolutely loves working. And she calls it her hum. And she said, it just makes me hum, the things that I do. But she kind of started to lose her hum. So basically, she just literally had a year of saying yes. So every time her daughter asked her, her daughters asked her to play with them, all the rest of it, she had to say yes. And what she discovered was actually that she was saying no to a lot of things in her life. But actually, by saying yes, inviting that wonderful kind of, I suppose, invitation to enjoy life more, she said that she did. And I love this quote. It's had a magical effect on me. So please, please, please do watch this TED Talk. It literally is only 18 minutes and 35 seconds long. That's it. But it's utterly, utterly brilliant. And what I love about that, and this is something that I've added to this, is to find your yes. And I was doing a talk last week, actually, and somebody said to me, oh, Sid, it's all very well you saying fall in love with stuff and, find your yes. But what is my yes? How do I find my yes? So I've got another, I'm sorry, Hannah, but I have another little acronym. So if you write the word yes down, the Y is you. So what is it that makes you come alive? What is it that really fires you up? What are you really interested in? What really excites you? What is the magic that you really love? The E is what is the energy and the emotion that I'm bringing to this? In other words, if I've got a battery, right, and it's full of my energy, 100%, how much of that 100% am I using in the things that I love, the things that I love to do? Okay, so that's the E, the energy. In other words, emotion, energy. E for energy, motion creates change. And the S is about serving. So how am I going to serve myself? How am I going to serve my loved ones, my colleagues, my friends, my community? And how am I going to serve the world to make the world a better place? And when you think of that as a lovely little acronym, it's a really good way of thinking about, why don't I just say yes to stuff? Okay, so that's the L for love. The I is involved, and I love that word, involved. And we all need connection. I mentioned this earlier about we are social beings. We need to be connected. That's how we evolved. That's how Homo sapiens became more dominant. They basically just teamed up in communities, and that's how we thrived. And whether that connection is through psychological, physical, or emotional, or even spiritual, it makes no difference. We need to be connected. We really, really do. And I mentioned this last month as well. I love the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. The opposite of connection is addiction. That's how it works. The less connected that we feel, in other words, the more disconnected we feel, the more that we need to substitute our lives with other things, whether that's alcohol, sex, drugs, or whatever that is, in order to feel that sense of connection with ourselves. So really think about your positive connections, friends, family, colleagues, and all the rest of it, but also think about the negative ones and think about those negative connections, write them down. Say, well, okay, I mean, people talk about toxic, work situations or environment, relationships, and all the rest of it. Write them down and think, well, okay, what is it about that negative connection that's not serving me well? And then think, well, okay, so what do I do about it? Really, really important. Now, if you can, I mean, I'm not here to sell other people's books, but I am going to sell this one because I think it's utterly brilliant. Dr. Gabor Mate, and with his son, Daniel Mate, wrote this, and it's recently been released the last few months. It's called The Myth of Normal. It's a genius book. It really is. And it talks about the world of trauma and how we can really start to understand each other better by this. And I love this quote: if we could begin to see much illness itself not as a cruel twist of fate or some nefarious mystery, but rather as an expected and therefore normal consequence of abnormal, unnatural circumstances, it would have revolutionary implications for how we approach everything health related. It is honestly this quote for me, the reason why I love this is when we think of adverse behaviors, whether they're childhood or adult behaviors or the rest of it, those behaviors are not what they are in the moment, but they're telegraphed, aren't they, from something that's happened before. And we look at the world of trauma and we look at the world of disconnection, that's where they come from. And that's why if we understand kind of modern illnesses, and we know that within doctor surgeries that over 80% of all modern illnesses within the developed world are down to modern lifestyle, stress, anxiety, not being able to cope, high cortisol levels, high adrenaline levels. It is about modern lifestyle. So again, if we look at that trauma and where that's coming from, and those behaviors are just in relation to that, then we understand each other far, far better. So that's I for involved, connection. The V is for value, and what do you value? And yes, I put a pair of pants on there. And Hannah, there is an absolute reason for that.
Don't doubt
it. I shall tell you in a minute. And I love this quote from Miles Monroe, who was sadly killed in a plane accident quite a few years ago. He was a kind of an evangelist, a great kind of speaker and writer. But the value of life is not in its duration, but it is in its donation. You are not important because of how long you live. You are important because of how effective you live. I love that. Absolutely love that. And when we think of value, values and valued, when we think of that really important little world, it's like, what does it mean to me? How am I bringing my values to bear in life? Now, many, many years ago, 20 odd years ago, I was offered a fantastic job over in Holland to work for an advertising network, and I was going to be paid a huge amount of money. And basically, it was a week before I was going to move to Amsterdam, and I was walking on the banks of the River Dee in North Wales with my daughter Lily, who was, I think she was about 11 years old at the time. And I said to her, look, I've got this amazing opportunity to go to Holland. What do you really, really think? And she said, well, actually, I told her before, but we kind of did the final kind of thing. Well, I'm going next week. And I said to her, what do you really think? And she said to me, Daddy, I think it's pants. And it was a saying that her and I used to use, but something was completely rubbish. And I said to her, I agree with you. I think it's a really pants idea. She said, I'll really miss you. Anyway, I was divorced at the time. And when I got back to the cottage later, I basically was upstairs packing, doing something. And then we basically left. I dropped her back at her mum's, which was like an hour drive. And then when I got back home, that little note was on my living room table. And it literally was those two little Playmobil characters. And it says, to Dad, I love you, from Lily. And it was that note that basically changed my life to say, well, actually, the things that I value, my daughter is more important than the value, financial and the career, aspects of a new job. So I wrote to them and I said, I'm really sorry, I'm not coming. And then I relocated to North Wales, and this is how this whole journey began. So again, when you think of that thing about, value, for me, it's around the three values of leadership. So value, what is the value each person brings? What are the values that they uphold in terms of how they conduct their life? But also, how valued are they? And how valued am I seeing them in their community, but also in their work situation as well? And what I love, and that I love words, but every one of these has a you in it. And basically, it's the same thing. It's like, how am I showing up for myself and for others that creates that wonderful sense of value for us all, that then allow us to be part of a valued conversation as well. And the last one, and I've touched on this just now, E is for emotion. And we really are emotional beings. That's it. Many, many years ago, when I worked in kind of advertising and branding, came across a guy called Kevin Roberts, really, really lovely guy, amazing. And he was, chairman or CEO, I think, of Saatchi & Saatchi Worldwide. And he talked about this relationship. And it really, it's one of those kind of talks that I kind of went to that I kind of went, wow. And he basically said, what do you think the role is with logic and emotion, with kind of human beings? And yes, he was referring it to kind of advertising and, marketing and branding or whatever, but actually it's pertinent to all us all. And he said, what do you think the difference is between logic and emotion when we're making decisions on stuff? And he had written amazing books, books on love marks, and had worked with Toyota and Starbucks and many huge organizations around the world to change that perspective. So I kind of thought, well, maybe it's around 60-40. But what was amazing is that he talked about this relationship, actually, that when we think about it in terms of human beings, we are energy and emotion. Actually, 95% of the decisions that we make in life are based on emotion. And I kind of drilled into that, did some research into it, and thought, well, okay, well, let's take an instance. Well, let's take food. Well, it's logical that we have to eat, right? That's it. Eat and drink. It's logical because that keeps us alive and fuels us. But when you think of the emotion around food, you think of the types of food, you think of the brands, McDonald's, Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, or whatever that is, you think of the amount of emotion that is packed in that decision, you know, to buy a hamburger or not be a vegetarian or a vegan or whatever that is. It's massive. And that's why thinking of ourselves, and that's why the E of live is around emotion. It's like, how emotive is my life? The decisions that I'm making are all emotional, for better and for worse. So what is it that I can do? Now, one of my heroes and one of my favorite books of all time is this, Steve Martin, A Comic's Life Born Standing Up. Now, I've mentioned 2 books today, so if you buy both of them, that's fantastic, but read them. But this is brilliant. And it basically just, I mean, it's like an autobiography of his early career. And literally, it's all about he talks about his 18 years of kind of stand-up routine. And he basically said that he took 10 years of practice. He took 10 years of learning practice. He took 4 years of refining, and he took 4 years of being successful. After he was successful for 4 years, he basically just said, right, that's it. He stood down and that was it. But what I love about this book is that he talks about perseverance. He talks about the need to keep on refining at what you're doing. And I think it's the same with a human being. It's like, yes, you know, we can kind of think that we're the finished article. No one is the finished article. We're all a work in progress. And what I love about this quote of his is teaching people, whether in a classroom or otherwise, is a form of show business. I actually think that actually is the practice of practice. And I mentioned this in last month's session. It's like you have to keep practicing at being a good human being. It doesn't come naturally. You know, when you think about, you know, people who are great on stage, or people who are amazing actors or amazing vets, all the rest of it, it takes a huge amount of practice. And that's why that Steve Martin book is just genius. I mean, it really, really is. I've mentioned this before. There's a book that is for free if you would like to download this book and read this. And it's The Magic Behind the Magic. Why do people come up with such amazing ideas, whether that's Leonardo da Vinci or people like, you know, Sir John Wilson, or amazing people. So if you scan that QR code in, you can get, you know, that book, little book, for free. Please do. Obviously, we've mentioned my books anyway, and I've mentioned this at the beginning. None of us is born unhappy. We just need to connect back into the magic that makes us who we are, by finding it, by living it, and ultimately by giving it. But again, we're wonderfully adaptable. Whatever issue you face, I face, is a moment in time. You know, it's like everything, isn't it? Something that was huge for me 10 years ago is tiny now. And something that is huge today, in a year or a month or in a day's time, again, will be small. So again, think of it in that way. And this is a quote from me. Living is a performance. I really do think this. I remember saying this to my sister many, many years ago. I said, life is theatre. I mean, she was very much on the logical kind of side of life. And I said to her, actually, life is theatre. She says, what do you mean? And I said, well, you can go in any bar, you can go in any social situation and overhear a conversation and create a film out of that. Every life is, but it's true, Hannah, isn't it? Every life is a performance. And yes, it takes hard work. It does take perseverance, which is something Steve Martin talks about. Yes, it takes a huge amount of courage. And we talked about that last month, didn't we? Courage comes from cur, Latin, French, heart, stories of the heart. How am I turning up? But it is so worth it. You know, when you think of, you know, I'm literally just going to put a post out, and yesterday literally picked my daughter up, you know, from playgroup. You know, was going back to home, and I said to her, well, actually, you know, I was dropping her off, and I said to her, let's put a song on. She said, Peppa Pig, Daddy. And I said, well, what Peppa Pig song? She said, Rainbow. She's only 3. So I put the Rainbow song on. Do you know what? It's such a beautiful song, Hannah. And we were literally dancing in the car as you're driving like this to Peppa Pig Rainbow. And again, it's a reminder, isn't it, that the magic is in those tiny little micro moments. It's not in the huge big things. It's not going to the Coldplay concert and going, oh, that's it, that's going to sustain me for the rest of my life. It's in those tiny little micro moments. It really is. So we're going to do this in a minute. So Hannah, back over to you. Does anyone have any questions? Do you have any questions? Look at all this good stuff.
Yeah, there's
can you
some
send
really
electron PDF? Yes, of course we can. We can do anything you like.
Yeah, some really interesting comments coming up there. I love Stuart's comment about, you're talking about learning from children, and sort of the lessons we can learn from small children's approach to life. And whether that's, like you say, playing Peppa Pig in the car, and I have a 3-year-old niece, so I'm very familiar with Peppa Pig. But it's absolutely true. If you think about, if you watch 2 small children interacting, they will laugh constantly and smile at each other and this kind of thing. And that's such a lovely thing to be able to try and harness.
And what's really interesting, Stuart, with that is, yes, I mean, apparently it's about 300 to 400 times a day. We on average laugh, adults 12 to 15. But actually, somebody has measured the amount of questions that a 4-year-old asks in a day, and it's about 437 questions. And when you think of their curiosity, that's exactly around that. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And like, if you spend any time around any kind of small children, the question why comes up so much. And actually, when you think about it, that really resonates with what you were talking about. Well, talking about values and looking at why we do the things that we do. And little kids have got that figured out, because everything they will ask why and ask you to sort of question and challenge your assumptions and that kind of thing. And that's, I think, a really nice lesson that that we can learn. Other sort of comments coming in. This is one of Rich's sort of things that Rich certainly lives by. His kind of slogan: "Have courage and be kind," which I think sums up a beautiful approach to life. What else have we got here? Teresa, savouring the small moments wherever they pop up.
And it is, Teresa, what's lovely about that is when you look at trust, which is, for me, is a really huge word, as you know, but it's those tiny little bits of trust. So when organizations talk about culture, they talk about trust. It's in those tiny little moments when you say, "Hannah, how are you?" but really mean it. And when Hannah says, "Actually, I'm not feeling too good today," it's like, well, why? Take that time. So it's in those tiny, tiny little drips of trust that actually build that bigger landscape of culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And those tiny little moments can have such a significant impact on everybody in any kind of sort of leadership role, whether it's your own role, your team, your practice, your community, your organization as a whole. So yeah, there's lots of lessons to learn there. I've made, like you said, make notes. I always make so many notes when I'm listening to you, Sid. So I've got all sorts of things to go away and ponder. I think some things that I'm like, I might like to actually go and look up a little bit more about that. So I might have to pick your brain a little bit. I love that idea of the value of life being not in its duration, but in its donation.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
That's nice. Yes.
It's my power to serve, isn't it? It's like, so, how am I going to give? And, Gandhi, paraphrase a quote, but, if I, how will I see, how do I want the change in the world to be, and be that change, bring that value, be somebody in a community that, that somebody remembers Hannah for all the amazing charity work or being kind. What a wonderful legacy, to leave behind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lovely. Well, again, Sid, thank you so much for bringing your inspiration and your enthusiasm along to one of our Microburst CPD sessions. Thanks ever so much to everybody who's watching and everybody who's commenting live. Obviously, the videos will stay up on all our social media channels, so you'll be able to catch up. Like Sid says, we'll be back again last Wednesday of next month. So that will be Wednesday, the 29th of March, again at 1 p.m. We'll be broadcasting live to our social media channels as usual. And also worth mentioning that if you would like to hear more from Sid and Meee Global, then he is one of our speakers at VMG Congress, which is happening on the 8th and 9th of June. In lovely Stratford upon Avon. So if you would like to come and join us, we've got a fantastic programme that we're really excited about. So do have a look. The link is on the screen there for the programme, and all the booking information and that kind of thing is available there. So thank you very much, Sid. Yeah,
you're very welcome. Have a great month.
Really exciting stuff coming up. So thanks ever so much to everybody. Thank you very much, Sid. We will see you next month. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon, everybody, and we will catch up with you soon.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye-bye.